complaint or information, or let's say you're a whistleblower. That's when your identity is protected. Now, the importance of having your name on the actual complaint is that it can be followed through. Okay, the only requirement or the only obligation the grand jury has is to acknowledge the receipt of that complaint. There's no obligation to, oh yes, we're going to look into that, or yes, that's a good point. Basically, just that you received your complaint, thank you for your submittal. And that's when the work begins. If a complaint is not within the jurisdiction of the grand jury, then it will not be followed through. What does that mean? Well, states, courts, and the federal government obviously are excluded from the purview of the grand jury. So let's say you have a complaint that comes in, and it sounds really good. It's all over the paper, everyone's talking about it, but it's not within the jurisdiction of the grand jury. Another kind of complaint can be, yes, it is within the jurisdiction of the grand jury. It is something exactly that falls within the purview. However, if the panel decides not to look into it, they can. The grand jury has what's called a supermajority vote. And as a collegial body, which is a body of all equals, a vote can be taken, and with our county, it's a group of 19, so that means you need a supermajority vote of 12. Let's say the complaint or the issue is within the jurisdiction, but the panel just is not interested. They just feel it wouldn't be beneficial, or whatever the reason may be. That's how powerful the supermajority vote is. In some counties, depending on their size and population, it's only 11. And only the Board of Supervisors can change that number. You can imagine, I mean, our county, we have 19. Imagine with LA County or Orange County, based on their population. Things can be different. Things can really change. So a complaint comes in, and the grand jury decides, you know what, we're going to look into this. This is something that the residents of this community will benefit from. What happens then? Well, as the first thing grand juries do after their orientation is adopt their rules of procedure. Okay, what that means is that they come up with a date and place to meet, how often they meet, and they set up committees and officers. So you will have the Social Services Committee, you will have Criminal Justice, Government Admin, and so on and so on. I had the privilege of chairing the Criminal Justice Committee and Government Admin. And of course, as you can imagine, I can't talk about what I worked on because I would be violating my confidentiality oath, but you actually get to understand how these departments actually work, what their governing rules are, what the statutes are, where they get their funding. How many departments do we have in our county? How many departments do we have in our city? How many of you, of course, being a very well-connected and well-educated panel that you are, how many cities do we have in our county? Okay, which ones are general law? Which ones are charter? Of course, Modesto is the only charter one. So you get to learn municipal codes that apply. You get to learn the charters. You get to learn the actual governing bodies, the Board of Supervisors, and the process. One of the most important things that gets a lot of these elected officials and different governing bodies in trouble is the Brown Act. How many of you are familiar with the Brown Act? Okay, that's very good. That's good to know. The Brown Act is, of course, the Ralph M. Brown Act, and it has a very local connection to us. Local council member that went on to be an assembly member that actually introduced this into law. It's called the Sunshine Act. It gives the opportunity for the public to know how your local elected officials, whether it's commissions, boards, and city councils, or Board of Supervisors, they do the business of government out in the open. What does that mean? That means there's agendas to be posted, and it's 72 hours before. That way the public knows exactly what the items on the agenda are. There's a public comment period where you actually, depending how it affects you, how passionate are you about the issues that are going on. You read the paper, look at what all the cat situation that's going on. Well, do you want to know how many millions of dollars are affected on this issue? Do you go to your city council meetings? Do you read about them, or do you actually, again, our City of Modesto website is really sophisticated. If I don't have a chance to attend these meetings, I read them online, the agenda and the minutes. So that's what the Brown Act does. I mean, all the way down to closed sessions. How many of you know about closed sessions? Okay, even though it's part of the Brown Act, but there's a reason why there is closed session. Whether it's pending litigation, whether it's some kind of a real estate contract that you really don't want to discuss in the public. However, it is the responsibility of that governing body to report on the decision that was made on that particular item. Very important. Now, let's go ahead with investigations. Now, if you have any burning questions, because I'm going to be running out of time, and I can talk for hours, but I know we only have 10 minutes to end our meeting. If there's any questions that you feel you need to ask me, please raise your hand, and I will make sure that I address it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is there any discussion any longer that
the question is there any discussion to extend the duty of grand juries to 2 years rather than 1? I have heard that discussion at annual conferences with the CGJA, and no, there isn't one. It actually, the only thing closest that I can address that question with is continuity and holdovers. The presiding judges have that prerogative if they choose to hold over any grand jurors, which I was a holdover for the 2nd year. It's great continuity, and I'll talk about reports and responses.
The reason I ask is because the term that they actually do any reasonable work is too short.
You know, I agree with you. The question is, or the comment is, he feels that the term for the grand juries for the fiscal year is not long enough. And I agree with you, especially when it comes to the actual, you know, by the time the orientation goes, by the time you go for your training, you come back, you know, time goes by. By the time you get your complaints, you set up committees, you start your investigation, research, interviewing process, and then the report writing. Next thing you know, the whole year is over. So I do agree with you. I'm not sure if someone will introduce a bill at the state assembly, because, you know, everything that we're talking about with the grand jury, it's all in the penal code sections of California state law, beginning with 888 all the way to 940. I'm sorry, Councilmember, there's a question here.
Well, who's the one that brought that up? You did, Phil? The two years? I absolutely agree, because when I was on it, just when you're getting into the meat of things,
Yes.
just when you're getting all the questions answered, you're cut off. And then it's up to the discretion of the judge if they want to hold you over. But my question is, if a civil grand jury, I don't know if the rules have changed, they find, or they think they find, evidence of a criminal act, can that be turned over to the DA's office?
The question is, if the civil grand jury during its investigation comes up with any information or any evidence of criminal nature, can it be turned over to the district attorney's office? The answer is yes, because the civil grand jury does not have the power or jurisdiction to look into criminal matters. And the responsibility is, you know, as legal advisors, the civil grand jury has as its legal consultants, primary legal consultant, the county counsel, but also Attorney General's office, the FPPC, and the district attorney's office. But it is entirely up to the DA to decide if they will pursue it or not. And the civil grand jury has that obligation to do so if they feel that, you know, there's criminal matters. Councilmember Geer?
Yeah, I served 05 and 06, unless the rules have changed, the incoming grand jury will elect to carry on with the investigation that was started with the previous one.
Really?
The question is, Councilmember Geer served on the 05, 04, 05, 56, I'm sorry, grand jury. The difference with that, Councilmember, is that every panel is so independent. One experience that I had was that